It did not happen in public and it was not framed as rebellion, but palace insiders say the moment landed with unmistakable force when Princess Charlotte quietly declined a royal expectation she fully understood. The reaction inside the family was immediate and restrained, yet deeply serious. This was not dismissed as childhood hesitation. It was read as awareness, and awareness inside the monarchy changes everything. The refusal. The moment did not announce itself with drama, but those present felt it immediately. Princess Charlotte did not raise her voice or challenge anyone directly. She simply declined to participate in a small but symbolically loaded expectation that had been carefully explained to her in advance. The refusal was calm, polite, and unwavering, which is precisely why it unsettled the room. Inside the royal household, tradition is rarely enforced through force. It is transmitted through familiarity, repetition, and gentle inevitability. Children are not ordered. They are guided until compliance feels natural. Charlotte's refusal disrupted that rhythm. It was not framed as rebellion, but it landed as resistance nonetheless. Those closest to her immediately recognized that this was not a tantrum or confusion. She understood what was being asked of her, and she chose not to comply. That clarity made the moment difficult to dismiss. In royal terms, intention matters more than volume, and intention was unmistakable. For Prince William, the instinctive response was protective rather than corrective. He has always been attentive to the fine line between duty and pressure, especially where his children are concerned. He did not react outwardly, but his attention sharpened. This was not something to be waved away. Catherine, Princess of Wales, recognized the shift just as quickly. She has long understood that Charlotte carries herself with a composure beyond her years, and that composure can sometimes be mistaken for readiness. Catherine did not push. She listened, aware that forcing compliance would only deepen resistance. What unsettled the wider family was not the refusal itself, but its timing. The monarchy is already navigating a delicate generational transition with heightened sensitivity around continuity and preparation. Any deviation, however small, now carries amplified meaning. Word of the moment traveled quietly without embellishment. No one dramatized it, but no one minimized it either. Within hours it was being discussed in careful language, framed as concern rather than criticism. The question was not whether Charlotte would eventually comply, but what it meant that she did not immediately do so. When King Charles III was briefed, the tone remained measured. This was not treated as a crisis, but it was not dismissed as trivial. Charles understands symbolism deeply, and he knows that early signals often shape long-term narratives. The most telling reaction came from Queen Camilla, whose response was quiet concern rather than alarm. She has seen how small moments harden into stories over time, and she recognized that this one would be remembered. Nothing was said publicly. Nothing needed to be inside the family. However, the refusal lingered, not as defiance but as a question. How much choice would be allowed and how early would expectations be enforced? Princess Charlotte had not broken a rule. She had simply paused a tradition, and in doing so she revealed a tension the monarchy has not fully resolved. This was not about a child refusing protocol. It was about a family realizing that the next generation may not accept tradition on instinct alone. Traditional importance inside the royal family. Tradition is not maintained for nostalgia alone. It exists to create continuity where individual preference might otherwise fracture the institution. The expectation Princess Charlotte declined was not dramatic on its surface, but it sits within a carefully layered system designed to normalize duty from an early age. That is why the refusal resonated so deeply. It touched a nerve that goes far beyond a single moment. Royal traditions involving children are rarely framed as obligations. They are introduced gently, woven into daily life until participation feels organic rather than imposed. The goal has always been familiarity, not enforcement. By the time a child is old enough to question the expectation, it is usually already internalized. Charlotte's pause disrupted that long-standing method. What concerned palace insiders was not that she questioned the tradition, but that she did so with clarity. There was no confusion about what was being asked or why it mattered. The explanation had been given carefully with context and reassurance. Her response indicated understanding followed by choice. That sequence is what elevated the moment from ordinary hesitation to something more consequential. This particular tradition carries symbolic weight because it is tied to visibility. It reinforces the idea that royal children are not simply private individuals but future representatives shaped gradually through exposure and ritual. Participation signals acceptance of that role. Refusal, even quiet refusal, raises questions about consent and timing that the monarchy has historically avoided confronting directly. For generations, the assumption has been that familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort breeds compliance. The institution has relied on that progression to prepare young royals without overt pressure. Charlotte's response suggested that familiarity alone may no longer be sufficient, especially for a generation growing up with far greater emphasis on personal autonomy. The wider family understands this instinctively. Prince William has spoken privately about wanting his children to understand duty without feeling consumed by it. He believes preparation should be intentional, not automatic. That belief informed his reaction, which leaned toward observation rather than correction. At the same time, the institution does not function on parental philosophy alone. Tradition serves as a stabilizing force precisely because it limits negotiation. Once expectations become optional, consistency erodes. This is the tension Charlotte's refusal exposed. It forced the family to confront where guidance ends and expectation begins. For King Charles III, the matter carried an additional layer of meaning. He has spent much of his life balancing reverence for tradition with a desire to modernize it. He understands both the necessity of continuity and the risks of rigidity. Charlotte's refusal placed those competing instincts side by side. The king did not interpret the moment as defiance. He interpreted it as information. Early signals in his experience often indicate where pressure points will emerge later. Ignoring them does not eliminate the issue. It merely delays confrontation. Charles has learned that lesson repeatedly, sometimes at great cost. What unsettled more traditional voices within the palace was the possibility of precedent. If one child can pause a ritual without immediate correction, what does that signal to others watching closely? The monarchy relies on quiet conformity. Visible hesitation, even when private, threatens that equilibrium. Yet correcting too forcefully carries its own dangers. The institution is acutely aware of public sensitivity around children and choice. Any perception that a young royal is being compelled against her will would be damaging in a way that tradition itself cannot justify. This is why the family's reaction was cautious rather than corrective. They were not deciding whether Charlotte would ever participate. They were deciding when and how expectations should be reinforced without triggering resistance. The tradition matters because it represents the earliest point at which duty begins to outweigh preference. It is a symbolic threshold, one the monarchy has crossed countless times without incident. That Charlotte hesitated at this point does not signal rebellion, but it does signal awareness. Awareness changes everything. The institution can accommodate uncertainty, but it struggles with self-awareness in those it intends to shape quietly. Charlotte's refusal suggests she is already conscious of choice, and consciousness complicates ritual. This is why the moment lingered, not because it was disruptive, but because it was revealing. The monarchy is built to absorb spectacle, but it is far less comfortable absorbing introspection. Princess Charlotte did not reject tradition. She questioned its immediacy. In doing so, she forced the family to confront a question it prefers to answer implicitly rather than explicitly. At what point does tradition stop being inherited and start being chosen? That question has no easy answer, and the family knows it. The refusal did not demand resolution, but it ensured the conversation would continue. And inside an institution that survives on quiet assumptions, even a single unanswered question can reshape the future. Family response. For Prince William, the refusal did not register as a challenge to authority, but as a moment of clarity that demanded restraint rather than correction. He has long believed that the difference between preparation and pressure lies in timing, and that forcing readiness too early creates resistance that hardens rather than fades. His response was measured, almost deliberately understated, shaped by an instinct to observe before acting. William did not dismiss the tradition, nor did he minimize its importance. He understands better than most how rituals anchor the monarchy and prepare its members for lives lived under scrutiny. What concerned him was not the pause itself, but what an immediate push might signal to his daughter. He has seen how expectations, when imposed without space, can distort the relationship between duty and selfhood. Catherine, Princess of Wales, approached the moment with equal care, though from a different emotional register. She recognized the composure in Charlotte's refusal and understood it as a form of communication rather than disobedience. Catherine has always been attuned to the internal worlds of her children, and she sensed that pushing for compliance would silence something that needed to be heard. Together, William and Catherine chose not to escalate. Their decision was not framed as defiance of tradition, but as a pause for understanding. They agreed privately that the moment required context, not consequence. This was not about allowing boundaries to dissolve, but about ensuring that boundaries were introduced in a way that preserved trust. That choice, however, did not occur in isolation. William is acutely aware that every parental decision he makes carries institutional implications. His children are not only his responsibility, they are future symbols. Allowing Charlotte space now would inevitably be interpreted by others as a signal of his broader philosophy toward tradition. William accepted that risk. He has spent much of his adult life trying to recalibrate the monarchy's relationship with its youngest members. He believes that endurance depends not on unquestioned obedience, but on willing participation. The distinction matters to him, particularly in an era where public scrutiny is unforgiving and authenticity is demanded rather than assumed. Catherine shared this perspective, though she carried a quieter anxiety. She knows how quickly private moments can be reinterpreted as public statements. She worried less about the refusal itself and more about how it might be remembered. Moments involving children have a way of hardening into narratives, and narratives rarely remain accurate over time. Their response, therefore, was careful and contained. They did not broadcast it within the family, nor did they conceal it. They allowed the moment to settle, trusting that urgency would only magnify its significance. In doing so, they subtly shifted the dynamic from expectation to conversation. This approach unsettled some within the wider family. Tradition, after all, has always relied on early normalization rather than later negotiation. William and Catherine's restraint introduced a different model, one that prioritizes internal consent over immediate conformity. That model is not universally embraced. Yet neither of them viewed this as a rejection of the institution. On the contrary, they believed it was a way to strengthen it. Children who understand why they participate, they argue, are more resilient than those who simply comply. Charlotte's refusal was, in their eyes, an opportunity to build that understanding rather than suppress it. William was particularly mindful of how this moment might shape his daughter's relationship with duty over time. He did not want her first experience of resistance to be met with correction alone. He wanted it met with explanation so that future compliance would be chosen rather than coerced. Catherine shared that instinct deeply. She has always believed that emotional security is the foundation of public confidence. Forcing tradition too early, she feared, might undermine the very composure the monarchy expects its young members to display later. Their response did not resolve the issue. It reframed it. By choosing patience, William and Catherine effectively delayed a decision the institution prefers to make early and quietly. That delay introduced uncertainty, but it also introduced honesty. Inside the palace, their restraint was noted. Some interpreted it as wisdom, others as risk. What no one disputed was that it marked a shift. The next generation was being guided differently, with greater emphasis on internal readiness than automatic adherence. William and Catherine did not present their choice as a principle. They presented it as a moment. Yet moments inside the monarchy often become